Have you ever really stopped to think about where our ideas of good and evil come from? I mean, really, we kind of treat them like they're set in stone, these absolute truths. But what if they're not? What if they were invented? And what if they were invented as a weapon? Okay, yeah, let's get into it. Because that is the absolutely explosive idea that Friedrich Nietzsche drops in his book on the genealogy of morality. And we're going to unpack it. So, here's the game plan. We're going to follow Nietzsche's thought process through 6 key stages. First up, we'll challenge the story we all tell ourselves about what good even means. Then, we'll dive into the 2 warring moralities he saw, master versus slave. We'll look at the psychological engine behind this whole thing, a feeling he called resentment. From there, we'll see how that feeling literally created the bad conscience, guilt. Then we'll try to understand why an ideal based on suffering got so powerful. And finally, we're going to face Nietzsche's most troubling question. What if our morals are the most dangerous thing about us?
All right, so Nietzsche kicks things off by asking that huge, fundamental question.
I mean, think about it. We just take it for granted that helping people is good and being selfish is bad. It just seems obvious, right? Almost like a law of nature. But Nietzsche, well, he was a master at blowing up the obvious. He wanted to get under the hood of our values and see what was really making them run, starting with the story we usually tell ourselves.
Now, before Nietzsche could build up his own theory, he had to tear down the leading one. He talks about this group he calls the English psychologists, which was really a little dig at an old friend of his, Paul Ray. Their explanation was pretty simple, almost boring. They said, look, way back when, we praised unselfish actions just because they were useful to society. And over the centuries, we just kind of forgot the useful part and started calling them good out of habit. Nietzsche thought this was totally unconvincing. For him, it just had no real psychological depth. So he asks, what's the real story?
Well, for Nietzsche, the real story is an ancient, epic battle, a clash between 2 completely different ways of seeing the world.
Okay, so you have 2 totally different moral operating systems here. On one side, you have master morality. This is for the nobles, the powerful warriors. For them, good was just a celebration of themselves. They looked at their own strength, their health, their power, and said, yep, this is good. Everything else, the weak, the sick, the pathetic, that was just bad, as in beneath them. But slave morality, it starts from the complete opposite direction. It's totally reactive. The oppressed, the weak, they look up at their masters and their first creative act is to say no. They point at the powerful and declare them evil. And by doing that, they automatically define themselves, the poor, the humble, the suffering, as good.
And get this wasn't just some dusty old philosophical debate. For Nietzsche, this was the defining event of Western civilization. He argues this slaves' revolt in morality, which he says started with the ancient Jews and was then perfected by Christianity, has been the dominant force for 2,000 years. It was a quiet, slow motion, but absolutely world-changing revolution. So how on earth did the physically weak win this moral war?
They came up with a psychological weapon of pure genius.
The engine behind this whole revolution is a French term Nietzsche uses, resentiment. Now, this isn't just being a little resentful. Think of it more like a deep, poisonous stew of hatred that just sits and simmers. It's the vengeful feeling of the powerless. You can't act on your anger, so it turns inward, it festers, and it gets creative. It's an imaginary revenge that ends up birthing an entire new value system. It's the genius of the weak to say, your strength isn't good, it's evil. And our weakness, that's not pathetic, that's good.
Nietzsche uses this incredible analogy to show the moral trickery going on here. He says, look, of course lambs dislike birds of prey. That's natural. But slave morality does something sneakier. It tells the bird of prey that it shouldn't act like a bird of prey. It reframes raw, natural strength as a moral choice. It invents the idea that the strong person is free to be weak, and so when they act strong, they are to be blamed. It's an ingenious move that didn't just change our values, it totally rewired how we think about being human.
And this is how that great external war became an internal one, a war inside our own heads.
I want you to picture early humans. As Nietzsche calls them, semi-animals, right? They were perfectly built for the wilderness, for hunting, for war, for adventure. All their aggressive instincts were pointed outwards. But then, bam, we get forced into the walls of society and peace. And suddenly, all those powerful primal drives are blocked. They have nowhere to go.
And all that pressure had to go somewhere. It's like damming a powerful river. First, we're stuck in this social straitjacket. Second, all those instincts for aggression hit a brick wall. So third, With nowhere else to go, they turn inward. Humanity literally starts attacking itself. All the cruelty we used to direct at others, we now aim squarely at ourselves. This, for Nietzsche, is the birth of our inner world, our soul, and its most famous product, the bad conscience, or what we call guilt.
And Nietzsche does not see this as a good thing. He doesn't pull any punches. For him, this whole process, this war against our own nature, is a profound sickness. It's where guilt comes from, where self-loathing comes from. It's the feeling that we are fundamentally broken sinners. And in his view, it's an illness we still haven't gotten over. But why would a morality based on self-hatred become so dominant?
Well, Nietzsche argues it's because this ideal solved an even bigger, even scarier problem.
Look, human beings are tough. We can put up with an incredible amount of pain and hardship. But the one thing we absolutely cannot stand, Nietzsche says, is suffering that means nothing. The senselessness of it all. That was the real curse. It was pushing humanity towards what he called a suicidal nihilism, a total rejection of life itself.
And that's where the ascetic ideal comes in, championed by the ascetic priest. This idea was a stroke of absolute genius. It didn't get rid of suffering, not at all. It just gave it a meaning. Your pain isn't random anymore. It's a punishment for your sins. Your hardship isn't pointless. It's a test of faith. This ideal basically saved humanity from the horror of meaninglessness. It gave us a reason to keep going. As Nietzsche famously said, man would rather will nothingness than not will at all.
And here's the priest's playbook. It's brilliant. He takes all that simmering resentment that the suffering people feel, and he gives it a new target. Instead of hating the powerful, the priest tells them to hate themselves. He does this great reinterpretation. Your suffering isn't an injustice, it's guilt. His message is simple and devastatingly effective. You are not suffering because someone is doing this to you. You are suffering because you are to blame. You aren't a victim, you're a sinner.
So this system saved us from despair, sure, but at what cost? This brings us to the final and maybe the most provocative part of Nietzsche's whole argument.
Nietzsche's ultimate fear is that this morality, the one that values pity, humility, safety, and being nice above everything else, is a leveling force. It just flattens everyone out. It creates what he calls the tame man, a comfortable, mediocre, and ultimately uninspiring human being. By championing the values of the herd, we risk sacrificing everything that is exceptional, great, and daring about humanity. He worries that in getting rid of our fear of man, we've also lost our love for man, our hope for what we could one day become.
And this leads him to his most radical, most terrifying hypothesis, which he puts in the form of a question. What if the very system we built to make us good is the one thing preventing us from becoming great? What if morality itself has been the danger of dangers?
And that's the question Nietzsche just leaves hanging in the air. He doesn't give us an easy answer. He forces us to think about it. Has this 2,000-year-old value system, born from the clever hatred of the weak, ultimately done more harm than good? Has it been stunting our potential all along? It's a thought that is just as unsettling and challenging today as it was when he first wrote it down.